Welcome to African Mafia stories, where loyalty is currency, power has a price, and every city hides a secret. Today's story is based in Botswana, but before the story begins, tell me this. If you could visit any African country, where would you go and why? The year Gabo Moremi came to our ranch, the earth had already started giving up on us. The grass had gone thin. The borehole coughed more than it flowed, and every cow we lost felt like the land was taking back a piece of our name. My name is Keletso Sechele, and before I married to the most feared cattle baron in the district, I thought survival was the hardest thing a person could learn. I was wrong. The hardest thing was learning to trust a man who looked like danger and spoke like truth. Our ranch sat between two larger properties, on land my grandfather had fought to keep and my father had nearly broken himself trying to preserve. To strangers, it looked ordinary. Dust, thorn trees, boreholes, cattle paths, and a house with more memories than paint. But the land was not ordinary. Beneath the hard soil lay the oldest reliable borehole in that section of the district, and if you understood cattle, drought, and power, then you understood what that meant. Water was not just water. Water was leverage. Water was loyalty. Water was the difference between a rancher and a man selling memories. My father still spoke about recovery like it was waiting just over the next hill. I handled the accounts, so I knew better. The bank letters had stopped pretending to be polite. Feed prices had climbed. 2 herdsmen had left for better pay. My younger brother, Dumelo, still believed we would somehow climb out of it because he was 17 and hope came easily to him. My father believed because pride had become the only thing he still owned outright. I believed in numbers, and the numbers said we were already mourning a ranch that had not yet admitted it was dying. The first time I heard Gabo Moremi's name spoken in our yard, it came wrapped in dust and unease. Our foreman, Tuso, came in from the western fence at sundown and said, "There are men on the boundary asking questions. Questions about the water line, questions about grazing access, questions about ownership." "Who do they work for?" I asked, already feeling the answer before he said it. He wiped sweat from his forehead and said, "Moremi." My father went quiet. That was how I knew the name mattered. People in our district talked about Gabo Moremi and Tato Maseko the way old people talked about storms they survived but never forgot. Once, long before they became rivals, the 2 men had been legends together. They started as herd boys from poor homes, boys who knew the smell of hungry cattle and cracked heels before they knew what ambition was. Gabo had lost both parents early and was raised by an uncle who believed silence built strength. Maseko came from a family that had land once, then debt, then shame, and he carried all 3 like old injuries. They met at a livestock auction as teenagers, sleeping near the pens because neither could afford lodging. By morning they had decided, without ever saying it out loud, that they would not die poor. They built slowly, bought weak cattle cheap, nursed them back, sold them well, reinvested every bula. Gabo was patient. He watched seasons, counted risks, learned which men lied with their mouths and which lied with their books. Maseko was brilliant and bold. He could charm a lender, bully a supplier, and convince a man to admire the very hand robbing him. Together they were dangerous in the way ambition becomes dangerous when it finally learns discipline. People said they survived the drought of their youth because Gabo rationed like a soldier and Maseko stole 3 tankers of water from men too rich to report it. People laughed when they told that story, but not because it was funny, because it sounded true. Then success arrived, and success did what hunger could not. It split them open. Where Gabo saw expansion, Maseko saw domination. Where Gabo wanted endurance, Maseko wanted submission. The final break came over a herd and a fire. A rival ranch had refused to sell. Weeks later, one of their grazing sections burned in the night and half their cattle died trapped behind a broken gate. No one proved Maseko ordered it. No one needed to. Gabo walked away from the partnership soon after. Maseko called him weak. Gabo called him finished. Neither man ever forgave the other for being right about what he had become. 3 days after Thuso brought us the name Moremi, a black truck rolled through our gate. Dust climbed after it in a long red sigh. My father straightened his shirt like he could dress failure into dignity. The truck door opened and Gabo Morebi stepped out. He was taller than I expected and less theatrical than the story suggested. No jewelry shouting for attention, no bodyguards hovering for effect. Just a pale shirt, dark jeans, boots dusty from real use, and the kind of stillness that belongs to men who do not need noise to be obeyed. When he looked at me, he did not scan or dismiss. He noticed. It irritated me immediately. "You must be Keletso," he said. "And you must be the man measuring our land before asking permission," I replied. My father shot me a look sharp enough to peel bark. Gabo almost smiled. That almost smile was my first glimpse of the man beneath the reputation, and I hated that I noticed it. He did not sit until my father offered. He did not speak until everyone was settled. Then he said, "The bank will force the sale within weeks. I'm here before they turn it into a humiliation." My father stiffened. "You assume too much." "I know too much," Gabo answered. He laid out the facts cleanly, the arrears, the lien, the value of the borehole, the interest from buyers who would strip the land and sell the water rights. He knew more about our trouble than some members of our family. That should have frightened me. Mostly, it made me angry. "And you are offering what?" I asked. "A purchase at a fair price," he said. "Employment for your workers, medical coverage for your father, school fees for your brother, a management position for you." My father stared. Dumelo looked ready to call him a savior. I looked for the knife hidden under the blanket. "And what do you get?" I asked. Gabo held my gaze. "The corridor." He said it like we all already knew what that meant. I did not, and I hated being the only person in a room who felt behind. He saw it on my face and, to my surprise, explained instead of enjoying my ignorance. "My southern and eastern grazing sections are strong separately," he said. "Your land links them. With this ranch, cattle move safely between water and winter grass." "And without it?" I asked. He answered without looking away. "Maseko controls the route, and every ranch around him eventually kneels." That was the true offer then, not rescue, alignment. Gabo left after an hour with no promises, but by sunset the next day, Maseko sent his own message. It came in the form of a truck parked just beyond our gate, engine idling, men sitting in the back with rifles rested too casually across their knees. One of them asked where I liked to ride when I needed to think. Another asked Dumelo which route he took to school. Threats sound uglier when spoken politely. That night, my father finally admitted what pride had been choking on. "If Maseko takes the land, he takes us by the throat." Gabo returned the next morning before we called for him. I never asked how he knew. Men like him build empires by knowing too soon. He did not say, "I told you." He said, "I can put armed men here today, but protection only works if the law stands with it." My father rubbed both hands over his face. "The sale papers are enough." "No," Gabo said, "not anymore." Then came the part none of us expected. My mother's family trust, a forgotten clause in an old inheritance filing, tied final disposition of the borehole land to direct bloodline consent. In practical terms, that meant me. The lawyers had missed it for years because no one thought we would ever be desperate enough to sell. Maseko had not missed it. He was already preparing to challenge any straight purchase and lock the land in court while he strangled us financially. Gabo stood by the veranda rail, looking out over our cattle as if he hated what he was about to say. "There is another way," he said. My father, weary and proud and broken in places he would never name, said, "Then say it." Gabo turned to me first, not him. That mattered more than I let myself admit. "If we marry," he said quietly, "the land can move into a joint operating trust immediately. Maseko cannot contest it the same way. He loses the corridor." The whole yard seemed to lean backward. Even the wind went still out of respect for the madness. Dumelo swore under his breath. My father stared like he had misheard on purpose. I said the only thing that fit. "Absolutely not." Gabo nodded once. "Fair." I was too angry to appreciate the calm. "You come here, price our trouble like cattle, And now you think marriage is a legal shortcut? His expression did not harden. That made me angrier. I wanted a villain. He kept insisting on complexity. I think it is the only way to keep your family safe without placing this ranch in Maseko's hands, he said. And what do I become in this plan, I asked. A wife on paper? An asset with a pulse? That landed. I saw it. A flicker, quick and real. No, he said. A partner, if you agree. Nothing if you do not. He left us with the offer and no pressure. Or maybe the pressure was simply built into reality. That was worse. I did not speak to him for 3 days. Those 3 days would have been easier if he had acted like a man waiting to be obeyed. Instead, he brought in engineers to inspect the failing borehole without charging us. He paid 2 workers their overdue wages and told them to thank the ranch, not him. He found Tumelo studying under bad light and sent a solar lamp through Tuso, our foreman, with no note attached. He noticed things. That was dangerous. Kindness from a man you want to hate is a particular kind of inconvenience. On the 4th day, a heifer went into distress near the far fence, and I rode out alone because anger is easier to carry on horseback. The animal was half down in thorn scrub, panicked and tangled. I dismounted, cut one branch away, and heard a second horse behind me. Gabo said nothing at first. He simply tied off his reins, stepped into the thorns, and took the more dangerous side without being asked. The heifer kicked once, nearly caught my knee, and Gabo's arms came across me so fast it was almost instinct. Watch your shoulder, he said. She throws right. We freed the animal together, sweating and swearing quietly in the dust. When it finally stumbled upright and ran, I laughed before I remembered I was meant to dislike him. He heard it and looked at me like I had accidentally shown him a secret. That unsettled me more than the proposal had. A thorn had sliced his forearm. It bled steadily. I motioned to it. Sit. I'm fine, he said. You are bleeding on my fence line, I said. That makes it my problem. He sat on a flat rock. I cleaned the cut from my field kit while he watched the horizon and pretended not to notice how careful my hands were. Why did you really ask? I said at last. He could have lied. Powerful men often do it from habit, not need. Because Maseko will come for this land until there is no law left to hide behind, he said, and because I trust you more than anyone he can buy. I tied the bandage tighter than necessary. You barely know me. He looked at me then, properly. I know how you speak to workers. I know your brother follows your decisions, not your father's. I know the books are clean because you kept them clean. His voice lowered just enough to matter. And I know you would rather bleed with the ranch than sell your conscience to save it. Nobody had ever described me so accurately without making it sound like a burden. It was infuriatingly intimate. I stood first. That still does not make me say yes. No, he said, rising beside me. It just means if you do, I will know why. That evening, I found my father on the veranda holding my mother's old scarf in both hands. He did not look at me when he spoke. I have spent so long trying to keep this place that I forgot it was never worth more than the people inside it. It was the closest he had ever come to an apology. For a man like him, it was a confession. The next morning, I rode to Gabo's southern camp before I could change my mind. He was checking vaccination records with 2 foremen when I arrived. He dismissed them with a look and waited. I hated that he did not look surprised. You expected me. I hoped, he said. That one word did more damage than a longer speech might have. If I agree, I said, there will be conditions. His face did something subtle and human. Relief, maybe, buried under discipline. Name them. My family stays in the main house until my father is well enough to choose otherwise. Tumelo finishes school. The workers keep their jobs unless they steal. He nodded after each one. Done. I swallowed and pushed farther. Separate rooms unless I say otherwise. He answered without hesitation. Done. And one more thing, I said. No lies. He went very still. The camp noise seemed far away. That one is more expensive, he said softly, but yes. The proposal itself came only after the terms, after the law, after the dust and stubbornness and fear had all been named. He took one step closer to me. Kelezo Sichele, will you marry me and stand with me in this fight? It was the strangest proposal any woman in Botswana had ever received. and somehow its honesty made it more dangerous than romantic. I answered before courage escaped. Yes. The wedding happened 6 days later, under a clean sky and the kind of quiet people mistake for peace. No huge crowd, no orchestra of aunties, just the magistrate, 2 witnesses, my father looking older than he admitted, and Tumelo trying not to stare at Gabo like he was still deciding whether to admire him or hate him. When Gabo slipped the ring onto my hand, his fingers trembled once, only once, but I felt it. That tiny tremor told me more than any vow. This mattered to him in ways he did not know how to survive. His ranch house sat 2 hours away on higher ground, built broad and practical with long verandas and windows facing the cattle sections. I had expended grandeur. What I found was order, bookshelves, maps, a kitchen used often, a piano no one touched. My mother's, he said when he saw me looking at it. She wanted me to learn. I preferred cattle. It was the first thing he had told me about himself that was not strategy, and I held on to it greatly. He showed me to a room overlooking the western paddocks. Yours, he said. If anything feels wrong here, tell me. That first week as husband and wife, we moved around each other like 2 people carrying lit lamps through dry grass, careful, aware, waiting for the smallest thing to burn. But intimacy does not always arrive through touch. Sometimes it arrives through routine. He learned I drank tea only after sunset and never very sweet. I learned he read reports at dawn with his sleeves rolled twice, never once. He left space for my opinions at meetings, even when the older men hated being corrected by a woman. I began correcting them with more enjoyment than mercy. He laughed exactly 3 times in that first month, and each one felt like finding water where the map promised none. Once I walked into the tack room after a long day and found a plate waiting there because he had noticed I missed supper. There was no note, but the bread was from the bakery he knew I liked in town. Small things are how affection sneaks past a guarded heart. The first time I touched him without necessity was on the veranda during a cold front. He had been staring too long into the dark after receiving word that 3 of Maseko's men were seen near the eastern route. I put a blanket over his shoulders before I thought about what I was doing. He looked up slowly, as if kindness still surprised him. Thank you, he said, and I understood all at once that gratitude sat oddly on him, because he had spent too much of his life being useful instead of cared for. Maseko, meanwhile, did not waste time. He tightened his hold on feed supplies, bought influence with a magistrate in town, and began picking off ranches too small to defend themselves. Men started losing cattle to theft and finding no witnesses. A borehole on a neighboring property was sabotaged. A foreman who refused a bribe disappeared for 2 days and returned with one ear torn open. Fear spreads faster than drought. People started choosing sides even when they claimed not to. The message to me came folded into a feed invoice. You chose the wrong side. There was no signature. Maseko's vanity was signature enough. Kabila read it, then looked at me. Not the paper. I'm sorry. It was such an unexpected answer that my anger broke around it. Do not apologize for what another man is. His voice dropped. I asked you into a war. I stepped closer than we had ever stood in stillness. Then stop standing as if you're in it alone. He looked at me for a long time, and something changed between us that had nothing to do with law or land. That night, our first kiss did not come from passion. It came from proximity, fear, and the relief of being fully seen. He touched my face like he was asking permission with every finger. I gave it without words. It was brief, careful, and far too honest. When he stepped back, he looked more shaken than I felt. That complicates things, I whispered. He gave me the smallest smile. They were already impossible. The attack that changed everything began with cattle noise when there should have been none. It was just after midnight when I woke to the sound of animals running wrong, not drifting, but breaking. Gabo was already up, dragging on boots. Stay inside, he said, which was the exact sentence guaranteed to fail. By the time I reached the yard, headlights were cutting the dark into violent pieces. Men on horseback were driving cattle toward a broken outer fence. Gabo fired once into the air, once toward a truck tire. The crack of the rifle split the night open. One of our newer workers fell beside the kraal, clutching his leg. I ran to him while Gabo and Tuso pushed toward the breach. The worker was barely 20 and trying not to cry. I tore my nightdress hem to tie off the wound and kept talking because pain obeys calm better than panic. A truck swerved closer than I realized. Gabo turned, saw it, and covered the distance between us with a speed that did not look human. He threw himself over me as the vehicle clipped the water trough beside us, and metal screamed against stone. When the dust settled, his shoulder was bleeding and his face was all fury. I told you to stay inside. I heard my own answer coming out shaking. And leave your people to bleed alone? Something in his expression changed then. Not surrender, recognition. We drove the raiders off before dawn, but 3 cattle were gone. 1 man was wounded badly, and Gabo's shoulder needed stitches. I stitched it myself in the kitchen because the clinic was too far and his patience was too short for pain. He sat shirtless at the table, jaw tight, muscles corded under lamplight, and I hated how aware I was of him. Do you know why Maseko hates you this much? I asked as I tied the last knot. He was silent long enough that I thought he would dodge it. Then he said, because I left, because I did it publicly, because people he wanted to frighten saw that he could be refused. He flexed his hand once, and because his younger brother died on a job Maseko planned and blamed me for not stopping. That sat heavily between us. Could you have stopped it? No, he said, but guilt makes men creative. By the 2nd month of our marriage, love had not been declared, but it had become impossible to deny. It lived in the way he waited if I spoke, no matter who else was present, in the way I learned the rhythm of his silence and no longer mistook it for absence. It lived in shared coffee at dawn, in exhausted laughter after long inspections, in arguments that ended with better plans instead of bruised pride. That made Maseko more dangerous, not less. The heart is a weakness to men who trade in leverage. The trap arrived as a message from a neighboring widow named Mebaizhip, whose herd had watered off our corridor for years. She begged for help. Her cattle were being blocked from access by armed men. She feared they would die before morning. I wanted to go immediately. Gabo wanted to verify first. Compassion and caution nearly argued us into disaster. In the end, we went together with Tuso and 2 riders. The old water post sat near the edge of the corridor, between thorn scrub and a dry wash. It was too quiet when we arrived. No widow, no herd, no sound except wind scraping thorns together. Gabo's whole body changed before he spoke. Back to the trucks. We did not make it that far. Men rose from the wash and the thorn lines as if the land itself had grown rifles. Someone struck Tuso from behind. Horses screamed. I turned to run toward the nearest vehicle, and a hand closed around my throat from behind, dragging me backward hard enough that my heels carved furrows in the dust. Gabo, I shouted, and I heard his answer not in words, but in the terrible sound a man makes when fear and rage fuse. Maseko stepped out from behind the broken trough like a man arriving late to a dinner he had personally poisoned. He was older than Gabo by a few years, broader through the chest, face still handsome in the cruel way some men age beautifully because mercy never gets to them. So this is the wife, he said, looking at me as if appraising livestock. You always did surprise me, Gabo. Gabo stood 10 paces away with his rifle half raised, and 3 men aimed at him from different angles. I had never seen him afraid before. I saw it then. You wanted me, he said. Let her go. Maseko's smile carried all grief sharpened into malice. I wanted you years ago. Now I want you to feel something first. He walked closer, eyes never leaving Gabo. Do you remember the auction yard in Sorowe, sleeping on feed sacks because we had nothing? Gabo said nothing. Maseko continued like a preacher with a broken guard. I told you then that no man would ever stand over us again, and you agreed. We were meant to rule all of this. We were meant to build something clean, Gabo said. You chose rot. Maseko laughed once. Clean? Clean men bury cattle too. Clean men let children starve because their principles cannot be eaten. His voice broke suddenly, just for a beat. My brother died because you walked away and left me with men too stupid to survive. He died because you sent him on a raid for pride, Gabo answered, and grief moved through Maseko's face so fast it was almost youth again. That was the thing about villains. The best of them were not born hating. They were built from wounds they worshipped until blood became identity. Maseko looked at me then, and I knew in that instant that he would hurt me not because I mattered to him, but because I mattered to Gabo. You built everything, he said softly to Gabo, and you chose this woman over the corridor. Gabo took one step forward. 3 safeties clicked off around him. He stopped, but only because I was in the equation. I chose what you could never understand, he said, something that doesn't need fear to hold. Maseko's hand flashed up, and the man gripping me pressed a knife at my ribs hard enough to promise pain. One more step, Maseko said, and she bleeds out in the dust while you watch. The world narrowed to Gabo's face. Every calculation in him was fighting every feeling. That was when I remembered the old heifer in the thorn scrub, and how Gabo had said, "Watch her shoulder, she throws right." The man holding me was right-handed. His knife hand was close. His balance was lazy because he thought fear was already enough. I slammed my heel down on his instep, threw my weight left, and drove my elbow backward as hard as I could. Pain exploded through me, but his grip broke for half a second. Half a second is all disciplined men need. Gabo moved. The first shot took the man nearest Thuso. The second shattered the knife hand beside me. Then everything became thunder. I dropped to the ground and rolled behind the trough as bullets cut dirt above me. Horses tore loose, screaming. Men shouted names and curses into the same air. Gabo did not shoot like a hero in stories. He shot like a rancher who has spent years learning that panic wastes ammo and hesitation buries people. Maseko's men scattered for cover. Thuso, half-conscious and furious, crawled to a fallen rifle and joined the fight with language ugly enough to inspire confidence. I saw Maseko circle toward me through the dust before anyone else did. He moved low, fast, not running from the fight, but toward the only leverage he had left. He grabbed my arm and dragged me from behind the trough. I hit him with both fists and every insult I knew. He barely felt the first part. Gabo saw us at the same moment. Maseko pressed his gun to my temple. Everything stopped again. The fight inhaled and held. "This is what you chose," Maseko said, chest heaving. Dust streaked his face. Blood darkened one sleeve. "A woman, a weakness." Gabo's voice came low and deadly calm. "No, a life." Maseko laughed, but it cracked in the middle. "We were supposed to own all of this together." "You wanted ownership," Gabo said. "I wanted something worth owning." Then Gabo did something I did not expect. He lowered his rifle and let it fall. I understood instantly. He was giving Maseko the win he thought he wanted. Because Maseko's vanity would make him step closer. It worked. Men like Maseko always needed to witness surrender from the front row. He dragged me with him, closing the distance, wanting Gabo to kneel in his shadow. Gabo did not kneel. He waited until Maseko was within reach, then lunged with the brutal economy of a man fighting to keep his soul alive. The gun went off sideways into the dirt. Gabo drove his shoulder into Maseko's ribs, and both men crashed down hard enough to shake the trough. What followed was not elegant. It was real. Fists, knees, boots, breath, rage. Maseko fought like a man who believed losing meant ceasing to exist. Gabo fought like a man who had finally found something he would die for rather than surrender. Maseko caught him across the cheek with the gun barrel. Gabo drove him backward into the trough. They rolled in dust and blood and old hatred. I scrambled for the dropped weapon, got there just as one of Maseko's men rose behind Gabo with a raised rifle. I fired before I had time to be afraid. The shot went wide, but close enough. Thuso finished the job with better aim and loud gratitude for my terrible shooting. Gabo and Maseko staggered to their feet almost together. Both were bleeding. Both were breathing like the world had narrowed to oxygen and vengeance. Maseko spat blood and said the saddest thing I had ever heard from an evil man. "You left me alone." Gabo's answer broke something in all of us. "No, Tato, I left when you stopped being someone I could save." Maseko came at him one last time. Gabo stepped aside, turned the momentum and drove him down hard. The fight went out of Maseko. not dramatically, but like a lantern starved of oil. He lay in the dirt, staring at a sky too big to be conquered. When district police arrived, called earlier by one of Gabo's riders who had escaped the trap line, Maseko did not resist. He just kept looking at Gabo, as if expecting the boy from the auction yard to choose him over decency. Gabo never did. After the vehicles left and the dust settled, and the wounded were seen to, I found Gabo standing alone by the broken trough. His knuckles were split, his mouth was bleeding, one eye was swelling. He looked less like a baron than a man who had wrestled his past and not come out clean. I said his name once. That was all it took. He turned, and whatever discipline had been holding him up gave way. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and held me with both arms like he was checking I was made of flesh and not fear. "You're hurt," he said into my hair. "So are you," I answered, because apparently even love keeps score when it is frightened. He leaned back enough to look at me. I thought. He stopped. Powerful men often do not know how to complete sentences that begin in terror. I put both hands on his face, dirt and all. "I know." That was when he kissed me, like a man done negotiating with himself. By the time we returned to the ranch, dawn was beginning to soften the edges of everything. The house looked both unchanged and entirely new. My father stood on the veranda with Dumelo and did not ask questions immediately because some truths arrive on bruises and do not need explanation. Maseko's empire did not collapse overnight, but men who serve fear are loyal only while it wins. With him gone, the structure beneath him showed its rot. Suppliers cooperated. Missing records surfaced. 2 magistrates suddenly remembered integrity. Ranchers who had been too frightened to speak found voices. The corridor held. The borehole remained ours. The workers stopped glancing at every passing truck like they were expecting doom to wave. Life did not become easy, which is not how real endings work, but it became possible again. A week after the fight, I found Gabo in the music room staring at his mother's piano like it had personally insulted him. "You still don't play?" I asked. "Not unless I want the walls to suffer," he said. I laughed, and the sound felt easy now. He came to stand beside me. "This marriage began for all the wrong reasons," he said. I turned to him. "That is not entirely true. It began because we wanted to protect something worth keeping." His eyes stayed on mine. "And now?" Now was a dangerous word because it required a future. I had spent so long surviving that hope still felt like borrowed clothing. "Now," I said slowly, "I stay because I want to." For a moment, the old stillness returned to him, but it was gentler now, no longer a wall, a resting place. He reached for my hand with the care of a man touching something he had once believed he did not deserve. Outside, cattle moved across the morning grass in long brown lines. The land that had nearly broken us looked almost ordinary again. That was the strange mercy of surviving violence. The world goes back to being simple around the edges, even when you no longer are. People still call him the most dangerous cattle baron in the district. They are not completely wrong. But danger is not always a thing that destroys. Sometimes it is the force that stands between destruction and the people it loves. And if you ask me what saved our ranch, I will tell you the truth. Not the law, not the borehole, not even the corridor. What saved us was the moment a man built for war decided that love was not weakness, and the moment a woman raised on stubborn land decided to believe him. That was how Gabo Moremi stopped being the man I married to survive and became the man I chose when survival was no longer the only thing on offer. The rest of our story belongs to us. But if you ever drive past a ranch where the cattle look calm and the boreholes pour water under a Botswana sky, remember this: peace on the land is never an accident. Someone always bled for it. Thank you for listening. Tell me, which African country would you like the next Mafia story to be based in and why? Drop your answers in the comments and I will take it from there. If you enjoyed the story, like, share, subscribe, because somewhere in Africa, another story is already unfolding.